My son left his phone on the kitchen counter sometime between finishing his coffee and rushing out the door. It wasn't unusual. He had come by that morning the way he often did: quick visit, a little conversation. The familiar rhythm of someone who had been in this house his whole life. We talked about his work, about a neighbor who had finally sold their place, about the weather turning warmer. Then he checked the time, stood up too quickly, and said he had to run. I noticed the phone about 20 minutes later while rinsing dishes. It was face down beside the sugar jar. At first I just smiled. It felt like a small piece of him left behind in the house, something ordinary. I figured he'd realize soon enough and come back for it. I left it there. The kitchen was quiet again. Sunlight was coming through the window above the sink, hitting the counter at that late morning angle that makes everything look still. Then the phone buzzed. Just once. I looked over without thinking. The screen lit up with a message notification. From his wife. The preview was short, but it stopped me in a way I didn't immediately understand. Did you talk to him about the paperwork yet? If he signs, the house and accounts will be easier to move later. For a moment I assumed I was misunderstanding it. There are a lot of kinds of paperwork in life: taxes, insurance, repairs. But something about the wording sat wrong. I dried my hands slowly and stood there looking at the phone. Reading someone else's messages felt like crossing a line. I had always believed privacy mattered, even inside families. Still, the message had my attention now in a way I couldn't ignore. I picked up the phone. It unlocked easily. My son had never bothered with complicated passcodes, just a simple one I had seen him type dozens of times over the years. The conversation thread opened. What I read wasn't dramatic, no anger, no insults. In some ways that made it worse. They were discussing plans the way people plan a move or a vacation. Calm, practical sentences about timing and persuasion. He trusts you more than anyone, she had written earlier. If you explain it as simplifying things for the future, he'll probably agree, my son had replied a few minutes later. I know. I just need to bring it up the right way. There were references to the house. My retirement accounts. A suggestion that if everything was transferred early, it would avoid complications later. I sat down at the kitchen table without realizing I had done it. The phone felt heavier in my hand than it should have. What struck me wasn't just the idea itself. It was the tone of the conversation, patient, strategic, as if my trust were simply a step in a process they expected to complete. I reread the messages twice. Then I placed the phone exactly where I had found it, face down beside the sugar jar. When my son came back that afternoon, he acted exactly the same as always. He thanked me for holding onto the phone, laughed about being scatterbrained, and left again a few minutes later. I didn't mention the messages. Not that day. The next morning, I called my lawyer. I had worked with her years earlier when writing my will. She had a calm voice, and the kind of patience that makes people feel comfortable explaining complicated things. I didn't tell her every detail. I just said I wanted to review my estate arrangements and make sure everything was structured properly. She asked a few careful questions. Then she said something simple that stayed with me. Plans can always be adjusted before someone else tries to adjust them for you. Over the next 2 weeks we changed several things. Ownership of the house was placed into a legal structure that required certain conditions before it could transfer to anyone. My retirement accounts were reorganized under professional management with clear limitations on access. None of it was dramatic. Just paperwork, quiet decisions. When we finished, she looked across the desk at me and said, "No one can move these assets without your consent now." I nodded. A month later my son brought up the subject over dinner. It sounded casual. He asked if I had ever thought about simplifying my finances, making things easier down the road. I listened without interrupting. Then I told him something that was entirely true. I've already taken care of all that with my lawyer. He paused. What do you mean? Everything's structured and documented now. Professionally handled. He didn't ask many more questions after that. But I noticed the shift in his expression. The way someone looks when a door they expected to open turns out to be locked. Our relationship didn't explode. We still have dinner sometimes. We still talk about ordinary things. But something changed quietly that day. Trust, I've learned, doesn't disappear all at once. Sometimes it simply adjusts itself, like furniture moved slightly across a room. Most people might never notice the difference. But the person who moved it always knows exactly where everything used to be.